Sorry, I had to get that recording going. I'll edit that part out of the audio.
Okay.
Um, so let's take a moment to talk about something which I'm guessing may not dominate dinner table conversation, but nonetheless affects everybody enough that it probably should. And that is, the federal debt, interest, and so forth. I'm looking at your article. Don't let the government carry any more interest. And I think, well, gee, they don't seem to have much problem doing it when it comes to federal spending. Talk to me about the situation that we're in, and talk to me why we shouldn't be encouraging the government to carry more interest.
Yeah, so what this is actually referring to is the what is known as the carried interest tax rate. Some people refer to it as a tax loophole. But in reality, what it is the interest that is generated through certain private sector financial decisions, predominantly by private equity firms, but also by asset managers, on certain very high item investments ultimately are taxed like a long-term capital gains, which is about 20% tax rate. And from this revenue, the investors ultimately yield profits based off their performance. So it's a very merit-based pay structure. If you don't perform well with your investment for the company, your pay is going to be a lot less. And what people are trying to do currently is to tax this at a regular income tax rate, to declare that this merit-based structure should be taxed like regular income. And at that value dollar, it would generally be at a much higher 37% tax rate. And there's a lot of moral arguments thrown around here. We need to tax the rich people more. This is their responsibility to pay for our society. When in reality, they already pay extravagant tax rates on their actual income. This is a capital gains, which ultimately is determined based off of the money that they are contributing to part of the program. They're not generating millions and millions of dollars all the time. It's oftentimes split up among a team of people that work on a certain account. Um, but what's so much at stake here is the threats that this could pose to our investment sector in the United States, and what that would mean for the broader economy.
Clearly, I'm not running in the circles that are spending a lot of time worried about carried interest. I'm curious who is hurt the most when taxes increase, though, on things like this. I mean,
Yeah, so
you mentioned the class warfare aspect of, we got to make sure the rich are paying their fair share. I'm confident they're paying what they can and also paying their accountants to figure, ways that they don't have to pay through legal loopholes. But I'm curious who would hurt from raising the taxes on that carried interest.
yeah, obviously the those performing in this sector would struggle and not struggle necessarily. I'm sure they're quite well off, but they would see a much smaller return from their investments, which then has just so many trickle-on effects probably to those that are involved in all this investment. And so what that means is, investments are made every single day in big and small businesses across various different sectors. These investments are bought by individual stock owners, pension funds. Your ordinary American is affected by the performance of the stock market and by our financial sector. We are all connected in this economy, what so all. So, well, a lot of people talk about, well, this asset manager would make less money, fail to capture the fact that this would have really negative impacts on their ability to perform in a merit-based system, and which is so important to rewarding those that do the hard work and get the best returns for our country and for our sector, our people, our businesses. Um, that trickles on to everyone else, and that has broader implications on the performance of the S&P 500, on the performance of your pension plan or your 401k. Um, and would decimate that structure just through trying to engage in this class warfare over tax rates of something that really isn't the same as their regular income.
Well, when you explain it like that, suddenly it doesn't seem nearly as shady. That the person who's generating those returns, um, if they're doing a good job, then they deserve to be rewarded for it. Of course, if you want to disincentivize that, then we'll just take more of it from you.
Right. That's really what this all comes down to is whether we want a system that is incentivizing hard work, incentivizing a focus on, maximizing returns ultimately for those whose money is being invested, whoever that may be, whether that's a business's investment decisions or large swaths of shareholders. Um, or we want a system that is trying to clamp down on people at different parts along the way, saying that, this person, there's trying to set some sort of fairness standards throughout the economy and balance this all out. But ultimately would make people feel like there's no point in trying to go on and maximize the returns and accelerate the growth of the economy, and which is really important right now as we have a bigger interest problem with the national debt. No, this would make them say, well, it's okay if I just play it safe, don't do a lot of research, and move on with my life. And while that's somebody in a very powerful and important office and on Wall Street, not necessarily the day-to-day person, it has knock-on effects for all of us that we tend to forget.
No, that makes sense. So tell me again, who is it who pushes most for this? I mean, you kind of alluded to a certain Vermont senator, and I thought, yeah, he would definitely be in line for that. But who are some of the forces behind? Let's go ahead and raise taxes on this particular place.
Yeah, so it's certainly a strongly supported by a lot of progressives and people on the left, but there is even now a push among certain members of the right that are trying to engage in this kind of class warfare, really at its core Marxist approach to looking at the economy, trying to pit people in the business sector versus the workers, and they see this through a redistributionist lens, through this idea of there's no connection of the economy between these people. It's just, wealthy people exploiting the poor. And so there's a real threat to this becoming a pervading view across both sides of the aisle, and our general understanding of economics today.
I think you make a good case too in this article to, you know, encourage entrepreneurship and encourage um, those who would welcome new ideas and products into the market. I mean, we want innovation to be able to come forward. And, if you punish the people whose job is to, find innovation, don't be surprised when suddenly there's a lack of it.
Yeah, certainly. I think that this touches so much broader on trends that we need to see back towards mergers and acquisitions, back towards startup engagement and initial public offerings, really energize our private sector, get businesses forming and merging and innovating and taking big risks. And sometimes, yes, that means certain ones perish and new ones rise up. But that's kind of how these things work. That's how we get innovation. That's how we get growth. That's how we get better salaries, better work balance, better everyday lives, products that we all need, supply chains that serve us, etc. And it's it's a working process, but it's so important, and we need to all understand that and appreciate it much more.
I really feel like you just gave one of the best uh, bits of advocacy for the free market that I've heard in a long time. And so thank you and well done. Again, we're talking with Sam Raus. Sam is a recent graduate of the University of Miami. He's a tech and consumer freedom fellow with Young Voices. And Sam, for people who want to follow you and your writing, where can they do that?
Yes, you can follow me on X now at Sam Raus1. That's Raus.
All right. Great talking with you. I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay.
Well, it's wonderful to have you back on the program. And I'm looking at the article headline here, A Crunchy Libertarian's Guide to Making America Healthy Again. And first thing, I think we deserve an explanation of the term crunchy. I hear it and I think I know what it means, but in this context, what is a crunchy libertarian?
Yeah, the term crunchy granola, they're interchangeable. It's definitely they've been around for decades, but they're becoming more popular, more mainstream terms. And it basically, I kind of describe it as like a hippie, like you like more natural things, you try to stay away from pharmaceuticals. I use the term very loosely. In my article I explained like I have a vegetable garden, I do yoga, like all of these hippie things, but also I do use traditional medicine. So it's really whatever you make it. But there's this crunchy movement is really gaining steam and becoming way more popular across the country with younger generations, specifically younger women.
So, and let's talk about how this dovetails into, well, Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s Make America Healthy Again movement. That is a movement that actually gained a lot of momentum over the last year or so. Talk to me about how these two interests might connect.
Yeah, so the Make America Healthy Again movement, the MAHA movement, has grown wildly in popularity over the past year, especially as RFK Jr. was in the election cycle, came into the Trump administration, and it's really been overtaken by the crunchy sector, crunchy moms, maha moms. You've seen it become very popular where they want to get away from traditional medicines, the traditional um, food system, and all of the things that the FDA is involved in. So you've seen a lot of these crunchy values, like natural foods, again, like less pharmaceuticals, more traditional, holistic health methods being uptaken in the MAHA conversations, the MAHA agenda. We saw a couple of weeks ago RFK Jr. come out and say that they are asking politely asking food companies to stop using these petroleum-based food dyes. So like red dye number 40, all of those different numbers that you see on all of your cereals, candies, and that's a huge win for this crunchy sector. But what I try to do in my article is really focus on the principles and looking at what the role of the government should be when it comes to our healthcare. Because we know we have a pretty sick country. The United States, we have compared to other countries similar to us, other European countries, we have a long life expectancy, but we have a long sick life expectancy. So Americans are living longer lives, but they're living sicker lives. So it's really not that great of a statistic to look at. And that's why I think this crunchy maha granola movement has really gained steam, especially with mothers as they're looking to create healthier, more balanced lives for their children.
Can we talk about this in the context of what we learned and maybe how even the pandemic and in response to the pandemic may have fueled the rise of this Maha movement?
Yeah, so I think with the growing rate of chronic illnesses and all these other illnesses have definitely fueled the MAHA movement, but I do think a lot of it was pushed off with the COVID-19 pandemic. We saw how much the government has control over our healthcare systems, our daily lives, all of these different decisions. And I think a lot of it, a lot of the decisions that were made created this sense of distrust in government and our healthcare systems. And hindsight is 2020. There's decisions that were made where they could have done better. I'm not a healthcare professional, nor am I a public health official. So I really don't want to critique anything that they did during the COVID-19 pandemic because you can always look back and say they shouldn't have made these mandates, whatever. But I think people really realize the power that the government has and that maybe they're not always making the best decisions. And we don't have the same access that we used to have to our doctors. And we really can't rely on these people to make these really like one size fits all choices for our very unique circumstances. So I think that's really helped fuel the Maha movement and put this conversation of personal health into the national conversation and having people again focusing on what is best for their unique circumstances rather than just relying on the government to make those decisions for them.
I have to give you credit too that um, it's good to be skeptical of movements. I know you kind of talk about being politically homeless, and um, movements like these can be co-opted pretty easily. I mean, they have a really good intention. As someone who has been very sedentary for a while and has recently started to become more active and moving around, suddenly I'm beginning to realize, you know what? I have a little Maha concern of my own, which is just simply becoming more physically active and taking exercise seriously. But I don't want to tie myself to a movement that is too steeped in politics, because then it seems like at some level it's going to devolve into a power struggle.
Exactly. Yeah, I know in the article, I've always been politically homeless. I've never identified with a political party. I identify more with ideology, and that's why I love like classical liberalism, libertarianism. That's the sort of things that I follow, is I look at principles, and the same principles have always guided me. And so I have a hard time aligning myself with movements. I was really excited when I saw Make America Healthy Again come to the limelight. I was very excited because I have a chronic illness. It's something I've really struggled with. I've also loved these like natural health. I love being active. I love gardening. And so it was really exciting for me to see that come to the forefront of our country's conversations. But I've also noticed, it's been very clear to me that this movement isn't based on any sort of principles. I think it's great that it's started having a lot of people thinking about their health and their journeys and their relationship with their doctors or their healthcare providers. But there's really no principles that are guiding this movement. So some of the choices and the policies that RFK and the movement is backing, I am just not aligned with. And I think you really see that with any movement, any political party. But I think that really the core issue in the article is just focusing on these principles and allowing that to guide your decisions rather than this group think and the party coalitions.
So, in the minute that we have left, let's recap the three core principles that you recommend for engaging with public health policy.
Yeah, I think number one is you have to restore the doctor-patient relationship. We don't have that relationship with our doctors. Our doctors don't know us by name. You have to wait months to get in to any provider. And that's because of so many government mandates. So again, the distrust that government has placed in the healthcare system, that has to be fixed. And there's so many ways that you can do that. Number one is the direct primary care arrangements, which are becoming more popular, and I discuss in the article. Next is that it's okay to challenge science. Science is ever evolving. We learned this in elementary school. We learned the scientific method, and that it's okay. We need to have that discourse, and that it shouldn't be something that you cancel someone over. Though we're seeing that a lot throughout the United States in our highly politicized society. And the last principle is consumer education should always be preferable to mandates, bans, and restrictions. So I think it's so much better, like in the conversation of food dyes, where consumers should know, like, hey, it's not a good thing to eat all these highly processed foods. We should empower them to make those decisions for themselves rather than completely taking them off the market.
And I love that personal responsibility is always there at the very basis here. Talking with Sofia Hamilton, Harm Reduction Fellow with Young Voices. And where can people follow you on social media?
You can follow me on X at Sophie Hamilton. I post all of my work there.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're happy to welcome back to the program Satya Marar. And Satya, this is not your first time on Moving Forward with Young Voices, but I'm guessing there are some folks who are hearing your voice for the very first time. Take a moment to tell us about who you are and what you do.
Hey, so I'm a policy professional working out of the Mercator Center at George Mason University. My research interests focus mainly on antitrust and competition as it affects everything from the technology sector to drug prices and everything in between. And I like to see a strong, competitive United States built on the principles of free markets, delivering prosperity and opportunity for everybody.
Okay, well, we've got a great article to help show how this is so. This article's titled "Trump's Attempt to Curb Drug Prices is a Wrong Step in the Right Direction," and I think I understand where you're going with that. Who would object to seeing drug prices come down? But why is it the wrong way to go about it for the president to be trying to bring them down?
Sure. So healthcare is one of those sectors, and drug pricing is one of them, is a part of it too, which is so heavily regulated with so much government involvement that it's completely distorted the competition mixture. Now, the first thing to think about is the differences in how Americans pay for patented pharmaceutical drugs versus other countries. So in most countries, developed countries, so-called socialized medicine systems, single-payer healthcare, whatever you like to call it, these agencies, they purchase drugs from pharma companies and they negotiate prices. So they try to get the lowest price possible, right? In the United States, Centers for Medicare and Medicaid cannot legally do that. What they have to do instead, for all but very few drugs starting in 2026, is they have to pay the lowest or average private market price for the drug. So in theory, this pegs the private market price to the price that the government is paying. Good, right, but not quite. So what happens is it creates the incentive to massively overcharge health plans and people paying out of pocket for the same drugs. And they end up selling fewer drugs on the private market, but they get that high per drug price from every single um, uh, purchase that Medicare and Medicaid buy of the same drugs. So what the US is doing is they're basically indirectly subsidizing the cost of patented pharmaceuticals for the rest of the world, because these companies, they need billions of dollars to be able to research and develop these drugs. That's a huge upfront cost, and they have to recoup those costs somehow. And they're not doing it so much overseas, because remember, these are countries that negotiate very low prices using what's called their buyer monopoly power. Uh, so they end up making huge gains in the US, and that's why the massive pharma ecosystem is based mainly here, not in those other countries. But it is rather unfair. Why should Americans shoulder so much of this burden, whether we're taxpayers or whether we're private patients? And what the most favored nation executive order aims to do is to try and peg the prices. Well, not the executive order, but the idea of most favored nation is to peg those prices that the Medicare, Medicaid, and the US pay to what those other countries pay. The problem with the executive order is it doesn't actually do that. What it does is it threatens pharma companies with antitrust investigations, revoking approvals of their drugs, kind of, you could say, even politically motivated investigations, litigation, and restrictions on exporting products and so on if they don't lower their prices to a certain amount. That is a price control. And that generally, as a matter of principle, isn't great. But there are ways that the Trump administration could legally do most favored nation drug pricing. They tried doing it in the first time around. They got blocked by the court, but it was on administrative grounds. And they can certainly try doing it again. And if they try doing it now, this could be in effect even before Trump leaves office.
I have to say, I've never heard it explained so well, and now I feel like I've been taken advantage of just because of the higher drug prices. But I did not realize that because so much of the research and the companies are here in America, that um, you know somehow that these other countries out there across the world wouldn't help to pay for that research like we do.
Yeah, absolutely. And R&D is important. I think one of the problems that we really have is that the two sides of this issue, neither wants to even address the very legitimate problem that the other side raises. So on one hand, we have a very legitimate problem of high drug prices in the US, which are paid for by Americans, while people in other countries benefit. And certainly the pharma lobby doesn't have an answer to this. On the other side of the ledger, we can talk about Americans paying as little as what other countries pay. But if the amount of revenue available for R&D for new drugs decreases that much, that's it. They're going to see fewer new cures. People's lives are going to be put at risk because these cures don't exist. Generic drug manufacturers, they're not going to have anything to replicate because those innovations would not be there in the first place. So what we really have to do is we have to come up with a better model, a way that other countries would agree to pay what the executive order describes as fair market value for American innovation. And I think that could be part of the trade agenda. That could be part of these new deals that are being made.
Interesting. I was wondering if, I mean, you correctly, I think, identify the problem, and it sounds like the solution isn't something that Trump was so far away from to start with, but you for instance, say he might consider returning to his original strategy. Is there anything preventing him from doing that right now, other than just maybe pressure from the people around him?
There's nothing really preventing him. Under the law as it currently stands, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid is allowed to experiment with alternative payment models than what the statute says on a trial basis, where they basically have to publish, the new payment model. They have to have a stakeholder peer where people can leave comments, and then they can trial the model and then see whether it leads to, a decrease in utilization of drugs or an increase in prices or what have you. And if things work out fine, then under the statute, they can replace the payment model with this new model. So all of that is still doable. It'll take a little bit of time, but if they start the steps now, they could do it. The only thing that stopped them the first time around was the court temporarily blocked it, saying, look, you need to solicit stakeholder comments and so on. And they were going to do it, but then the Biden administration came in, and the Biden administration scrapped the whole plan entirely. And they instead opted to in the Inflation Reduction Act, they introduced drug price negotiation for a few specific drugs, and that'll begin in 2026. So that's what happened, and they could always return to the original plan. Nothing is stopping him. We'll just see now how things play out.
Satya, I have to ask you this in terms of the economic free market. I would love to see the free market much more at work here, but because of the heavily regulated nature of the drug companies and even the healthcare markets, is it likely we're going to ever see anything close to a really free market, or is there always going to be some degree of government intervention and management inserted in there?
I mean, I think you could argue it's inevitable that we'll always have some level of regulation, and in something like healthcare, I mean, sure, I think we all want there to be a drug approval process, even if that adds expense. We want to make sure that we have a certain amount of confidence before we inject someone's body with something. With that being said, I don't think the system has to be as bad as it is right now. We can begin slowly unwinding it. We can begin introducing market-based incentives. Part of that could begin with negotiating with other countries so they can pay more for these drugs, and we can come up with prices that everyone can kind of compromise on in order to ensure that we can still have these cures available. Because, guess what? If the US isn't producing all these drugs and other countries aren't willing to step up, they're going to have to be willing to pay for what's to come because it's their own citizens' lives at risk.
Well, this is definitely going to make my next visit to the drugstore one where I'm more aware of exactly what it is I'm paying for. I'm not going to just simply tap my card and be like, oh, whatever it is, insurance will cover the rest. I really did not understand the great discrepancy there. So I appreciate you shedding some light on this. Again, we are talking with Satya Marar. For those who want to follow your work, what's the best place for them to access it?
Yeah, I'm Satya Marar on Twitter or X. You can find my work there. You can also follow record of my publications on mercatus.org, and also subscribe to our bi-monthly newsletter, The Competition Corner, for all things hot in the world of competition. That's competitioncorner.substack.com.
Very nice. Great to visit with you. I look forward to our next conversation.
Likewise, thanks for having me.
Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment of today's Moving Forward with Young Voices. Very happy to welcome Antonia-Laura Pup back to the program. And it hasn't been that long since we spoke, but I know there are people who are meeting you for the very first time. Antonia, tell us just a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Thank you very much for having me. It's great to be back. I am a fellow at Young Voices currently, but in my day-to-day life, I work as a research assistant at Georgetown University. I also do a little bit of teaching there, and I research the Black Sea security. I used to work for the Romanian Parliament, advising the president of the Defense Committee. I also have a bit of professional experience in international organizations such as the OECD. And my research focus lies very much at the transatlantic agenda, which is also the core of my article today, and I'm very happy that I can speak about it just as the NATO summit in Hague is unfolding right as we speak.
Yeah, a lot has happened so quickly in just the last few days. And I love the title of this article you have here too, Chips on Their Shoulders. Europe must pick a side in the tech war to keep America's protection. Now, I know a lot of the attention has been on Israel and Iran, but talk to me a little bit about where does Europe stand right now? The Russia-Ukraine conflict has been very, very large in most people's minds for the better part of this year. It's now been upstaged, but there's still a great deal of uh, disorder among NATO in trying to deal with this at this point, isn't there?
Clearly. And a lot of times when we speak about the biggest threat to Europe's security, and of course the main state that bears the guilt to why we are in the dire security situation we are having right now on the continent is Russia. And there is no doubt towards that. But as NATO allies very sharply identified in the latest communique from the last summit that was held in Washington last year, celebrating 75 years of NATO, it is China that is, through its economy, a decisive enabler of Russia's war economy. And of course, if we didn't have China help Russia in bolstering its defense industrial base and sustaining covertly or through economic means this effort, I would think that this war would have ended a lot quicker. Right now, we are in a situation that we don't see a peace coming very soon. All the more the European allies, I think, are beginning to be very clear-eyed on the fact that even when we will have a peace, this danger of Russia becoming aggressive towards a sovereign country will not go away. This is precisely why right now the NATO heads of state are debating and agreeing, hopefully, on a new transatlantic bargain, which will be largely focused on Europe shouldering more defense and having European countries invest more in their capacities, up to 5% of the defense spending by 2035, so that it will be a return to NATO's core mission, to deterrence. And deterrence will not work only towards Russia, it will also work towards all the other countries that have a strategic agenda that it's not aligned to our values. And here, as I said, we must also think about China.
That to me seems like I don't know how to say this without sounding like, gee, are you doubting your own country? But if I were in Europe and I were trying to decide, is it better to align ourselves with the U.S. or to align ourselves with China? I don't think it's just as clearly black and white a decision for many. I wouldn't think it would be an easy decision for them. There are some benefits to either one of them, and there are some drawbacks to either one of them.
Definitely. Speaking of that 5% new target that is agreed upon in Hague right now, this percentage is comprised out of two elements. Yes, we have 3.5% that go towards hardware, core defense spending, but we also have 1.5% that it's intended towards cybersecurity efforts, critical infrastructure protection, and basically enabling elements of security. And here I'm just thinking of the fact that since we acknowledge the fact that we need these enablers, we must be investing also in screening capacities to make sure that we are able to counter hybrid threats that might come from a coordination between Russia and China. And the NATO allies already acknowledge the fact that China is an emerging challenge towards the Euro-Atlantic security. In 2022 in Spain. When it comes to my country, for example, I am very proud of the fact that we are leading in de-risking policies towards Beijing. Yes, we maintain trade. We have great trade relations with Beijing, but when it comes to these critical infrastructures like energy, like telecom or defense related dual use technologies, we must be again very clear-eyed. Romania is, but it's not also the case of other countries. This is why 17 out of 27 EU member states still rely on China for their 5G telecom networks, which I think it's a dangerous dependence. It's a dangerous dependence because China is an autocratic regime that tries to challenge our rules-based international order, that supports Russia and tries to undermine transatlantic unity on the long term. So I wouldn't say it's just only about appeasing Trump and making sure that Trump is on our side of the conversation. It's also about the security of our own citizens. And I would hope that more and more governments in Europe understand that in the long term.
One question for you, Antonia, regarding the quality of Chinese tech versus the quality of U.S. tech. I mean, there for a long time, I know growing up, we pretty much believed, well, everybody in China is still on bicycles. China has come a long, long way, technology-wise. Are they close enough that they could be considered a peer in terms of their technical advancements?
Very much so. I think that we have seen it through the development of their now very wide-known AI model, LLM, large language processing model, DeepSeek, which has been launched and that is used by the Chinese military to support their activities. It's something that has been published just a few days ago. So when it comes to Chinese technologies, it's not only about business. All the time we will see this intelligence military layer to the conversation that makes us in need to be skeptics towards Beijing intentions. When it comes to quality, yes, I think we have to be very careful towards the fact that China is already a near peer adversary for the United States. And in Europe, we must avoid the scenario in which we would be entrapped between Washington and Beijing. And I think that we should think further into developing our own strategic autonomy, and that includes secure digital capabilities.
Once again, we are visiting with Antonia-Laura Pup. She is a Young Voices contributor with Young Voices Europe and a Fulbright student and teaching assistant at Georgetown University in Washington, D.C. Where can people find you on social media?
They can find me on my LinkedIn, which is Antonia-Laura Pup, and I publish all my work there. I'm very happy to have been invited here once again, and I send all my regards to all your listeners.